Most teenage girls dream of meeting the love of their life, eloping, and getting married. Caroline Crouch was no different. She was just 15 years old, a young girl in high school, when a financially well-off 27-year-old pilot won her heart. He flew his helicopter over her school to propose. The two eloped and got married. It seemed like the perfect fairy tale love story, but it would soon turn into a murder that fooled the world. On Tuesday, May 11, 2021, at 4:30 am, a man named Haralamba Sinopoulos, also known as Barbus, was horrifically awakened from bed. At the time of the incident, he had rented a 2-story maisonette in the suburbs of Glika, an area located on the outskirts of Athens. Chrysobabus didn't have much time to retaliate. 3 men who were wearing hoods to conceal their identities attacked him. They were armed with pistols and quickly overpowered him. They then tied up Barbus and blindfolded him with duct tape. He was unable to do much as the intruders then went after his wife, a 19-year-old girl named Caroline Kea. The whole thing woke up their 11-month-old daughter, who was sleeping nearby. The intruders, with Greek and Albanian accents, kept asking where the money was. Caroline didn't know that what seemed like a robbery would turn into her own murder. Caroline Crunchka was born to retired engineer David Crunch in Susan de la Costa on July 12, 2001. Athens when she was just 8 years old. The family relocated to the island of Alonissos, where she had grown up. They moved because both David and Susan had fallen in love with the coastal surroundings. From a very young age, Caroline loved the beach and was passionate about both scuba diving and swimming. She met her future husband Barbus during a Good Friday parade in 2017. At the time, Barbus was a commercial helicopter pilot, and Caroline was only 15 years old. 3 years later, they got married in Portugal on July 15, 2019. A few days before she was killed, Barbus and Caroline bought a plot of land. They planned to build their dream house there with their infant daughter. Caroline's parents gave her 50,000 euros as a gift to help with the purchase. The couple had around 10,000 euros saved for the construction costs. The Hussite public in Greece at the time didn't rely much on banks as they were at continuous risk of facing bankruptcy given these circumstances. It was common for the general public to have cash stashed away in their houses. It was deemed a safer option, and Caroline probably had a similar perspective for storing cash and by no means would have anticipated what would happen on May 11th. A cry for help. Both Barbus and Caroline, along with their daughter, were terrified as the intruders asked about the end. As they searched the house, the looters took jewelry and other items of value. They wanted more, but Barbus and Caroline had given up everything. They were desperate and afraid, begging for their lives and that of their daughter. Barbus could hear his wife screaming as the intruders held a gun to the 11-month-old infant. Even though he was blindfolded, he fought against the restraints. However, the rope around his neck was tightened until he kept fainting in and out of consciousness. He eventually fainted and then came to after a while. When he was conscious again, he found that the men had left the house. All he could hear at the moment were the painful cries of his infant daughter. About 30 minutes later, Barbus was able to get close to his mobile phone and dial emergency services using his nose. As soon as the call connected, Barbus cried out for help, asking emergency services to send an ambulance. Give them his location. He had duct tape around his mouth, so the entire call was filled with muffled words. The operator on the other end asked Barbus to explain what happened, but all he could say was that robbers had come in. It had been an hour and a half since the intruders had broken into Barbus and Caroline's residence. First responders arrived at the scene around AM as they raced up the front steps to enter the house. What they saw was horrific. Inside, the living space and kitchen had been completely destroyed. The drawers were open and empty, with clothing and other belongings scattered across the entire space. Among them was an open Monopoly box, the same one Barbus and Caroline had hidden the money in. First responders also found a security camera on the living room couch. It appeared as if it had been ripped off the walls, while the camera was lying on the couch, and its memory card was missing. From the staircase hung the corpse of a white and brown husky. The puppy had been strangled with her own leash. Barbus was found on the floor of the main bedroom. His eyes and mouth were covered in duct tape that reached his neck, and he was restrained with hands and feet behind his back. On the bed, lying face down, was Caroline Crouch. Their infant daughter was beside her, crying and clapping as she pushed her mother in an attempt to wake her up. Caroline was declared dead. Their daughter, while in evident distress, appeared to be unharmed. First responders, however, They quickly noticed Caroline's pale skin and realized she had been murdered. Barbers went into shock when he was released from his restraints and saw the corpse of his wife, the woman he'd loved for the past 5 years. The officers quickly secured the infant's safety and began questioning Barbus. Based on his account of the scene and the presence of 4 men, the police determined that 3 men had. One of the men went into the house while the other 3 kept watch. They figured out what happened based on the evidence at the scene. 1. The intruders came in through a dirt road that led to the back door. 2. They couldn't get in that way, so they took the pins of a basement window to get in the house. 3. Once they were in the basement, they killed Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky. The murder weapon was her leash, the main bedroom where Barbus and Caroline were asleep. 5. Then they damaged the house and took the money out of the Monopoly box. 6. Before leaving, they murdered Caroline by smothering her with a pillow. 7. Since Barbus was drifting in and out of consciousness, the intruders may have assumed he died and left, believing that they had left no witnesses behind. As far as Caroline's death is concerned, it was revealed that it was not an instant experience. The 20-year-old female suffered. The attack lasted about 6 minutes. There were bruises on her body that looked like they were caused by sharp objects, and there were also marks on her lips and tongue. There was no evidence of sexual assault. The police did an investigation and looked into it, but they didn't find any concrete evidence that the intruders had left behind. The only thing that the emergency first responders found in the house was the hood of one of the intruders. Based on how Barbus had described the event, it was thought that the hood must have fallen while Barbus was retaliating. This may have been a small piece of evidence for a case of such magnitude, but the hood falling off was enough for Barbus to get a glimpse of the culprit. A sketch was created based on the details Barbus shared, depicting an overweight, dark-skinned, tall individual. Despite being disoriented, Barbus was able to identify the firearms that were used. He said that the intruders had a black pistol and a silver Colt. The investigation revealed that the intruders got away with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000 euros. The police also said that this was the work of professional criminals who had observed the family and waited for the right moment to strike. Furthermore, a police spokesperson said it was brutal and violent and went on to categorize it as an act of someone with a lack of emotions and a strong antisocial personality. As the investigation progressed, people started making a lot of assumptions. They were looking at the money that was stolen and wondering why the murder was necessary. Some people thought that maybe the intruders were high on drugs and couldn't control themselves. Or maybe Caroline saw them or knew them. She was a black belt kickboxer, so maybe she fought back. The investigators were certain about one thing. The attack was premeditated. They believed the intruders knew the couple had money hidden in the house. Based on this assumption, the police questioned Barbus and Caroline's inner circle. They believed that the gang had been given a tip. The police also looked at security camera footage from nearby homes and businesses. They found a dark-colored vehicle followed by a motorcycle that had been seen driving around the couple's house on the morning of the murder. Caroline Crouch was laid to rest 3 days after the murder. Her burial site was the Greek island of Elenisos, where her parents had fallen in love and where she had grown up. She grew up as paid tribute to his wife and said he was lucky that he had met Caroline. He was very lucky that she loved him, and even more lucky that she was the mother of his daughter. He went on to say that their daughter would grow up not remembering her mother. Barbus added that Caroline was the joy of life and will always be near him through their daughter. While Caroline was being laid to rest, a car was pulled over in northeast Greece as a routine stop. Inside was a 36-year-old Georgian national. Georgi Haridishvili was on his way to the Bulgarian border. He had handed over his passport, but it was soon identified as a fake. Who was this man, and how is this related to Caroline's murder? This man was soon identified as Georgi Haridishvili, a violent criminal who had multiple prior convictions. He was wanted for 12 break-ins that were committed all over Athens over the past 6 months. The fact that 3 of these crimes were committed around Barbus and Caroline's neighborhood painted him as the likely culprit. One of the 3 was in December, when Haridishvili and 3 others broke into a house through a rear window, similar to what happened with Barbus and Caroline. They then continued to drag the female occupant by the hair and threatened to slit her throat. During that robbery, the group had stolen 10,000 in cash and jewelry. The next robbery was on March 7th, just 2 months before Barbus and Caroline were targeted. During this robbery, for others, an older couple and their cleaning lady were tied up. The loot included cash and other items of significant monetary value. If patterns aren't enough to paint him as the culprit for the murder, then guess what? He had remarkable similarities with the sketch made using Barber's description of the intruder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Haridashvili had a history of violent break-ins, an attempt to flee the country, and he looked like the sketch. The police were sure they'd found their man. Haridashvili was arrested and interrogated for days. They also used physical means to get answers from him. He was repeatedly questioned about getting to the location, entering the house, and killing Caroline. The physical means used to get answers left him concussed. However, he kept his stance and stated he said he'd never heard of Caroline Crouch. The evidence the police had against him didn't hold up in court. Haridashvili wasn't their guy after all. They cleared him of any involvement in the murder. As a result, 3 police officers were demoted from the Athens homicide squad. They kept investigating and ended up focusing on a local Albanian organized crime group. They started with a list of 100 people and narrowed it down to 10. These 10 were individuals on a list of criminals known as the Red List. Mugshots of each one were shown to Bevis, but the police didn't reveal any other details. The case was taking longer than usual to solve, and the public was beginning to lose patience, given that crimes based on race had increased. The information on Caroline's case was so scarce that even a huge monetary reward went unclaimed. Residents of Athens by now were living in fear, not knowing who would be the next victim. Media reports from the time cited experts saying that this was not an ordinary case. If it was, it would have been solved. Some investigation details that were revealed stated that there was no DNA or fingerprints. Caroline's family Bevis was grateful for the continued pursuit of justice. He told journalists that he wished the same thing for anyone else. He supported the police and continued to speak to the media to keep Caroline's case alive. He was even active on social media, answering questions and expressing gratitude for continued support. A breakthrough came on June 17th, 37 days after Caroline was brutally murdered. A small memorial service was being held for her on all Onassis. Those who had come to mourn noticed the detective at the ceremony. Once the event had concluded, the investigators approached Bevis discreetly, asking to be escorted to Athens. The detectives had new information about the case and urged Bevis to come and identify the man. Bevis, not knowing what lay ahead, agreed. By this time, the investigators had followed up on quite a few leads and analyzed some key details the night Caroline was killed. These details didn't add up. Bevis had told the police that the intruders broke in from the basement window. But that window was very small, and with the physique of the supposed killer Bevis had described, it was not possible for that to have been the point of entry. Bevis had also claimed that the house had been trashed by the intruders. However, the neighbors told the police that they didn't hear anything of the sort. The sounds that night were of a couple's puppy crying in distress. There was no evidence of a break-in, no calls for help, no crying infant. The house didn't have any fingerprints or DNA. The question of why the intruders would tie up a male and fight a female was raised. Bevis had also claimed that the intruders must have taken out the memory card for the security camera in the living room showed that the memory card was removed at 12 o'clock a.m., which was a few hours before the intruders were supposed to have entered the house. Caroline was wearing a smartwatch that monitored her pulse. Her pulse readings from 3:58 a.m. indicated she was asleep, but the ones at 4:05 a.m. were up by 50%, indicating severe physical and mental stress. The readings at 4:11 a.m. indicated that her heart had. This was before the time Bevis said the murder took place. Bevis had a fitness app on his smartphone. Data from the app showed he was moving around during the time he was supposed to be tied up. The police also tried to reenact Bevis dialing emergency services with his phone, but no one could do that. Police investigations revealed that Caroline had tried to book a hotel for herself and her daughter on that night she was killed. The text message sent to her friend also revealed that she was threatening to leave Bevis. Back when Bevis had met Caroline, he was on holiday in Alonissos. His mother had lived on the island and was a teacher at Caroline's school. Bevis was charismatic, clever, loved to take photos, and was well off financially. He gained Caroline's attention by flying a helicopter over her school. This was somewhat of a dream that most teenage girls have, but Caroline was under the impression that this would be a perfect match. She even told her family she was happy. Bevis proposed a year and a half into their relationship. At the time, Caroline was underage, but she turned 18 3 days later. The couple exchanged vows and settled in Glicineira. In the early years of their marriage, Caroline attended college in Athens, while Bevis continued working as a pilot. Both of them were active on social media, sharing the happy life they were living. From their social media handles, the couple appeared to be in a joyful relationship filled with love and romance. The story in Caroline's diary was completely different. In her diary, she often questioned her relationship with Bevis. In 2019, she wrote about fighting with Bevis and how serious the fight was. She had mentioned that she was planning on leaving and going to her sister. She wasn't sure if she could continue with him. Bevis had become more and more manipulative and controlling throughout their marriage. When they got back from their honeymoon, Bevis kept Caroline isolated. He was the only one who provided for the family financially, and Caroline was just a university student with limited funds. Susan, Caroline's mother, sent some money, but Bevis took it. Caroline wrote in her diary, "I love Bevis so much that I can't leave him, even though this relationship hurts me." She also wrote about a tearful confrontation with her husband. She wanted to leave Bevis, but she couldn't because she was pregnant. Caroline wrote, "I stayed with him so my daughter would not grow up without her two parents." Another entry from her diary, dated July 2020, read, "Today, my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told Bevis I want to leave. I feel awful." The diary also mentioned a house in Athens, located in Halandri. What started out as a fairy tale love story for Caroline, it had now turned into a nightmare. A nightmare filled with pain, horror, despair, and a sense of being estranged. A nightmare that she couldn't escape, one that would eventually consume her. Phone records revealed hours before her murder that she and Bevis had been arguing while they were at home together. This served as a testament to how distant and dysfunctional the relationship had become. The investigators told Bevis that he was the new suspect in the murder. Kasihi was shown overwhelming and irrefutable evidence that revealed the inconsistencies with the details he had initially shared. Bevis said that Caroline was determined to take their daughter and leave. This made him lose control, especially since he said that the child was his whole life. He also said that Caroline had thrown the infant in the cot and told him to leave the house. He said that Caroline was the one who resorted to physical abuse and had pushed him and punched him. Bevis added that because of this, his judgment became clouded. From this point on, Bevis lashed out, strangled her, pressed a pillow on her face with his full body weight, and killed her. It was a cold-blooded murder in front of an 11-month-old child. He mentioned thinking about getting rid of the body, but knew that wouldn't be possible. Soon after, he thought about framing someone else. He staged a home invasion and killed Roxy to make it look real. He then tied his own child to the corpse of his wife. He also tied himself up with rope and duct tape. He said he deserved to be punished, and that he owed a big apology to everyone he'd hurt. He believed his actions were not justified, but he tried to shift blame on Caroline. He said he had become unstable and aggressive after the couple's one and only child. That child would now have to grow up without her. Mothira, a child who will never know who her mother was because she was brutally killed by the very man she once loved. The case was later dubbed the murder that fooled the world. Robbers had become so confident about getting away with the murder that he didn't bother to destroy the evidence seen made to Ota 2. He was charged and found guilty of premeditated murder, preventing the course of justice linked to authorities and animal abuse.